Welcome to Texas Heart Institute podcast on living legends and luminaries in endovascular medicine. I'm Zvonimir Krejzer, an interventional cardiologist at Texas Heart Institute and Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center in Houston. Today's guest for our podcast is Dr. Julio Palmaz. Julio Palmaz was born on December 13, 1945, in La Plata, Argentina. He received his MD degree in 1971 from the National University of La Plata in Argentina. He joined San Martin University Hospital to practice vascular radiology in 1974 in La Plata in Argentina. He moved to the United States in 1977 and spent 3 years training in radiology at the UC Davis Medical Center in California. Palmaz, shortly after his arrival to the United States, was inspired by Andreas Grunzig, the inventor of PTCA, percutaneous transluminal coronary angioplasty. However, it became clear to Dr. Palmaz that PTCA might not be a long-lasting solution for the treatment of atherosclerotic arterial disease of the coronary arteries and elsewhere. To address this concern, he started working on various scaffolding prototypes, and soon did he realize that this would require sophisticated engineering that was not available to him at UC Davis. To pursue this goal, he accepted a position in the Department of Radiology in 1983 at University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio. A few years later, he succeeded in creating a slotted tube stainless steel stent that could be expanded with a balloon to hold the artery open and to improve the blood flow. There, jointly with a cardiologist, Dr. Richard Schatz, they developed a prototype stent that was small enough to safely navigate tortuous coronary arteries. They patented their stent technology in 1985 and licensed it with Johnson & Johnson in 1998. Palmaz stent was approved for use in peripheral arteries in 1991, followed by an approval in coronary arteries in 1994. Within 4 years of its FDA approval, Palmaz-Schatz balloon expandable stent was used in over 80% of percutaneous coronary interventions. Currently, approximately 1 million stents are implanted annually worldwide. Dr. Palmaz was also instrumental in designing with Dr. Juan Parodi, a vascular surgeon from Buenos Aires, Argentina, the first EVAR stent graft, in part using Dr. Palmaz's patented technology. He has worked as chief of angiography and special procedures in the radiology department at the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio since 1983. He currently holds the Ashbel Smith Professorship as a tenured professor at UT Health Science Center in San Antonio. Dr. Palmaz is now recognized as one of the most important contributors in endovascular medicine. His Palmaz stent is listed in the National Hall of Fame as one of the 10 most important interventions in the last 100 years. Palmaz stent is on display at the Smithsonian in the section of biomedical engineering. Dr. Palmaz holds 62 patents to his name. Dr. Palmaz has published or contributed 32 books and chapters in the field of endovascular medicine. During his professional career, he has achieved many accolades, and some of them are American Heart Association Award for Distinguished Contributions, National Academy Award, Inventors Hall of Fame Award, Circe Gold Medal Award, and also at our institution, Ray C. Fish Award. Dear Julio, thank you for agreeing to record a THI podcast on living legends and luminaries in endovascular medicine. Even though so much is available on this topic and your achievements, there are key details that might be missing in the literature about you and your journey in this field. I would like to ask you a few very important questions related to your career. And we would start, probably the best would be to start with the very beginning. When was the first time, Julio, that you began to think about becoming a physician, and what was the reason for this desire?
Well, I mean, there was not a burning desire to become a physician. I think that, the choice of career is always serendipitous, and that was in my case. I really cannot pinpoint a reason. I could have been an engineer. I don't think I would have been a lawyer, but I could have been in some area of technology as well. But I chose medicine.
Very good, Julio. So what was the reason for you to decide to leave La Plata and Argentina and come to the United States?
Well, that was it was when I discovered medical research through journals. And my reading the current literature of the time and the constant incoming flow of medical innovation in the mid-70s and even earlier, it was definitely a source of wonder for me. And I always was very curious about how was research done, who financed it, where were essentially the mechanisms to get to that coveted position of being a researcher.
Very good. So what were the circumstances that stimulated you to design a stent, Palmaz stent?
Well, actually, it was, I was already with the attitude of create something. Obviously, I came to the States with the idea to do research, to contribute, and I was looking for opportunities. And that came up in my first year of residency when I attended my first cardiovascular meeting at the Society of Cardiovascular Interventional Radiology in New Orleans in February 1978. And Grunzig was giving one of his early lectures in the US, and I was in the audience, a small audience of about 70 people. And he presented for the first time coronary balloon angioplasty. He had done only a few cases, and he was full of questions. In fact, he was not certain about anything. He was just proposing it as an intriguing alternative to surgery. And I was among the many in the audience that were awed by this new approach, and definitely he is posing the problems and limitations of balloon angioplasty was what elicited in my mind the idea of a scaffold.
So when you were at the UC Davis and you started on the project of designing a stent, what were the obstacles that you encountered in designing a stent?
Well, I mean, the subject was controversial at the time. I mean, installing a prosthetic material in an endovascular fashion at the time was an idea that people could envision, but it was not welcomed, because there were so many untested alternatives that were not prosthetic that, essentially the stent had to wait in line, so that all the other alternatives, including balloon angioplasty, were proven to be actually limited, including laser, and atherectomy and so on.
Obviously, at UC Davis, when you were working on the prototypes, you had certain challenges, and you decided that you had to leave UC Davis and come to University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio. So what were those challenges, and then how did you overcome those challenges?
Well, at that time, I just finished with my residency, and I was a junior faculty. all the institutions that I had as options in California did not offer me. What I needed was significant amount of research time in my daily activities, and having 30% research time was only a privilege of senior faculty at the time, and I had to come to Texas to look for that opportunity, and I found it here.
So after talking to you, Julio, just recently when I visited you, you also mentioned that at UT in San Antonio, there was a technology that was available to you to really perfect the design for your stent. Can you mention just a little bit in detail what was that missing link that didn't exist at UC Davis?
Well, I was still in California when I learned that one of the possibilities to manufacture a miniature device such as a coronary stent was EDM, or electromechanical discharge machining. So when they told me that that machine was available at UT Health Science Center in San Antonio, obviously that made up my mind to come here. And also they gave me a significant amount of freedom to do research in terms of how I could, arrange my timetable.
So while you were at the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio, and you were perfecting your design as far as Palmaz stent is concerned, you also approached a non-radiologist, cardiologist, Richard Schatz. And what was the reason for this decision that you needed to work with Richard Schatz to do something that you couldn't probably do on your own?
Well, at that time, I was already 2 years into my journey as faculty member of the UT Health Science Center and trying to do research with a limited budget. I was looking for essentially a source of economic support for my project. I went to the Southwest Research Foundation and asking for support, and I was really given no options other than the name of Richard Schatz, who was another person interested in coronary interventions. And so, maybe for lack of options, I gave Richard a call that very afternoon after I got his number, and that same afternoon I had him in my office, and I was showing to him the prototypes, and Richard became from there on an incredible supporter, and that his enthusiasm was pivotal in my career.
So obviously you had a vision that Palmaz stent obviously could be used in periphery, but you also had to figure out the way how coronary artery, which is significantly smaller vessel, and there were certain obstacles that you had to deal with. Maybe you can answer a little bit about it. That obviously was a challenge because you wanted to address what Andreas Grunzig mentioned, that there were challenges with PTCA, and then how do you create a scaffold that can traverse very small and tortuous coronary arteries?
Correct. So, the problem essentially was financial. You just needed resources to be able to have access to equipment and personnel and follow up. What it already was evident at that time that getting into research in humans using implantable devices was going to be very challenging and long and expensive. And so, with the help of Richard, we were able to get there by finding, supporters and, and essentially eventually a sponsor company that would essentially adopt the project.
So maybe you can mention to us a little bit other challenges, such as licensing your products, Stent, Palmaz stent, Palmaz-Schatz stent, And what were the challenges that you encountered from that point of view once the device was ready to be used in humans and clinical trials?
Right. A few years after, after starting at UT, we already had an application for a clinical trial in the periphery using the balloon expandable stent. And actually, I was surprised at how fast the FDA responded, but also how long the list of requirements was to get started. So I started trying to unravel all the complicated issues of clinical investigation and trying to answer all regulatory questions, which at that time were quickly piling up.
Very good. So let's talk about a little bit about the future as far as endovascular interventions are concerned. And of course, one of the burning issues and questions that we have as interventionalists is what future improvements are needed in stenting to prevent restenosis, which is Achilles heel of any intervention.
Right. Obviously, the addition of drug elution to the platform, the coronary stent and others, was, a solution for the problem of restenosis, at least a quick solution. But to a certain extent, the success of the drug-eluting stent inhibited the development of improvements in the basic materials, and that was, in my view, neglected. It would have been perhaps, theoretically, had the drug-eluting stent never appeared as an option, we would have gone further into the development of more biocompatible materials. So if I can say something that has not been done and it should be developed further is the materials that with enhanced biocompatibility and also superior performance to the ones that we have currently at hand.
Well, I learned from you, Julio, in talking to you that stainless steel stent, the way we produce it at the present time, is not a perfect solution. And I remember probably more than 10 years ago, you started to address this issue and worked on a stent using nanotechnology that would remove all the impurities that potentially contribute to developing restenosis. Are you working on any research projects in this area?
Yeah, we essentially, have a company that does sponsor research, and we've been doing this for many years in the pursuit of the perfect material. And there's a paradox in a coronary stent, particularly, that is a device that weighs only a fraction of an aspirin. Is 25 milligrams is the average weight of a coronary stent. An aspirin being 10 times as heavy is required to be substantially pure, yet it is only a few cents in cost, while a coronary stent is hundreds of dollars, and yet the purity of the material insofar its components and structure and many other things is not regulated. So no, I think the standards for the composition of the materials that are in a stent should be more regulated and therefore lead to materials with, say, pharmacological purity.
Very good. So in your view, Julio, what are the most important contributions and also contributors other than you that we all accept is one of the major ones in the last 5 or 6 decades has happened in endovascular interventions? If you can list it for us, the contributions and contributors.
Well, things are going so fast that is a dizzying increase in progress. Well, I mean, definitely, but the most significant contribution of them all was the appearance of Grunstig and his 1977 report of the first coronary angioplasty in a human being. That, was tremendously impactful. And I was among the legion of people that got incredibly stimulated about that. And we all took it up as a challenge to keep on going further. Um, Nonetheless, there's been a legion of people that had made incredible contributions to the specialty to get to the point we are today, and and the style and the purpose of many of them have been, very different among investigators, contributors. Some of them have done very patient work, very steady, very organic in the way they develop their programs. Others have had sparks of genius and have not particularly, pursued ideas, rather had lots of them. And so, it's different. We have all kinds of different contributors in our field. Um, I would say, it comes to mind, Patrick Cerise has been a tremendous pioneer for all this endovascular medicine development, and largely due to his his work ethics and his tireless attitude toward developing things, and systematic development of things that have been fundamental steps for us to go forward. For example, he was very instrumental at the beginning of the trials, the Stent and the stress on developing QCA, a QCA laboratory, which without quantification of what we were doing was impossible to come up with things that were measurable. And and then he, organized all the contributors in Europe and Latin America, and he was the leader of the Stent trial, which was magnificent for not only for the achievement of what he found out in the comparison of stent versus angioplasty, but also in the speed that all that was achieved, in just a few months, really. And then, Patrice, also was fundamental in the investigation of the comparison of the bare metal stent versus drug-eluting stent, and with Ravel, and he was also then the pivotal person in answering burning questions that we had once we were into the current use of stenting, and that was the comparison of stents versus CABG, coronary artery bypass, and his development of syntax 1 to 3, and then Excel. He was able to, establish the role of stenting in chronic ischemia. We all knew that the stent became king in the coronary infarction, but the chronic ischemia question was open, and he was able to pacify that and be able to come up with answers about how to select patients for each modality. And then, of course, then, there were other important contributions, like the role of PTCA stents, in other words, coronary intervention versus optimized medical therapy, and of course, carriage and ischemia trials were very important for all of us, and we were able to again establish another comparison for selection criteria, and then of course the advent of the bioresorbable stent, and again Patrice was a great contributor in this area, and so on. So if you had asked me that question before, and I really, if I really had to play homage to somebody that we owe him a lot for where we are today, I would say Patrick is my favorite.
Oh, interesting. I was surprised by your comments because Patrice is a cardiologist, interventional cardiologist, and you talk about all the important coronary artery disease trials, but you are an interventional radiologist, and I'm surprised that you didn't mention any of the interventional radiologists that were really also luminaries, like Charlie Daughter from Portland, who was one of the first ones, if not the first ones, to try angioplasty and to try stenting. And actually, when Grunzig started his career and research, that was all based on what Charlie Daughter was initiating. And then, of course, you worked together with Juan Parodi on the first stent graft procedure that was done in 1990 in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and Nikolai Volodos and many other ones outside of the field of coronary interventions. So do you agree that they belong in that on that pedestal of glory and achievements?
I understand where you're coming from, and definitely we need to put all this in the context of the time. You know, in the 70s, you could do things like Charlie Daughter used to do, where, you know, he was coming up with a fundamental invention every other day, and he was a tremendous pioneer in that respect. But in reality, today, all of that wouldn't fly. And because you know, there's lots of great ideas out there, but to prove them is where the problem is, and that is, you know, the only way to get to that point is through systematic, you know, effort and many years of inspiration and work, and so, you know, many of the ones that you mentioned that obviously we owe a lot to were rather inspirational figures, mainly more than building blocks to where we are today. So that's simply, I have great appreciation for systematic work and people that hard work tirelessly and to achieve a goal, that to produce a piece of work that was worth being published in first line publications like the New England Journal of Medicine or Lancet. And I'm not looking down on all the publications of lower readership, but definitely it's a measure of quality, and only those great pieces of work only get there, and
Okay.
that's all I mentioned. I mean, but again, I'm not trying to belittle the effort that all the others have done.
Well, Julio, I admire you for talking about really all the important things that happen in endovascular field in early stages of your development, research, and so on. Actually, you broke the barriers as far as being involved in endovascular interventions, not just with interventional radiologists, but with cardiologists and other interventionalists, which, from your words that I heard directly from you, was not really looked upon favorably from the radiological societies. And I don't want to say that you were a pariah for them, but you were, for a short period of time, almost like persona non grata until they realized all of your achievements and contributions. Can you mention just briefly about that issue?
Okay, a couple of things have to set the background. Of course, I became a board certified radiologist, and I went through all the trainings, and further on I had my CAQ codification for interventions and so forth. But from the perspective of to choose your ways to achieve something, I mean, I always knew that, you know, coronary intervention was paramount. But in the 70s, to be able to do research on endovascular, you had to choose radiology, because radiologists at that time had control of the X-ray equipment, and they were the ones that were actually doing these things. And all the great innovations had to go through the peripheral vessels first to be able to get to the more critical areas. And So that maybe answered the question why I chose radiology. And in reality, I never been much of a radiologist myself because I always been an interventionalist. But I had to choose that avenue simply for a matter of having access to all these facilities. Um, and then, we all went through the early beginnings, which fortunately all that is solved today. But the early beginnings, there were political issues in who would get to do what, and it was actually problematic at the time to determine, whether cardiologists would have control of of peripheral interventions, and then the surgeons came in and they claimed their piece of the territory as well. So there were, turf battles that we all know at the time. And those who were in teaching, like I was, in the lecture circle, talking about these things all the time, sometimes, we had to face, these political issues. Fortunately, all that is over, and the dust had completely settled. But yeah, there was some controversy at the time.
Well, thank you for explaining this a little bit more in detail, and I appreciate that. You are a friend of mine, and we know each other over 40 years, and I always felt that you were non-biased and friendly to your colleagues in the field of interventional cardiology. Let's focus a little bit more on a specific detail related to Julio Palmaz. What were the key factors to your success in research and interventions?
Serendipity. Good luck.
What were the key factors, right? What had you had to do to achieve success in your field and developing all the things that you have developed in your career?
Well, definitely persistence. Like you said, the formula is a little bit of inspiration and a whole lot of perspiration to achieve success. If you get swayed by failures along the way, you're definitely not material to get into any challenging project. And definitely, if I had to attribute something to my success in having achieved a contribution in the approval process of all intravascular stents is my persistence, because we had plenty of problems along the way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So obviously we didn't mention that yet, but Johnson & Johnson company was instrumental to bring Palmaz and Palmaz-Schatz stent to the market. So maybe you can mention briefly, was this a long, difficult, and arduous process to work with a company like Johnson & Johnson to make it happen?
Well, again, that's what I mentioned, serendipity, because there's a whole bunch of luck factors involved into a successful development. Having met Richard Schatz, who brought the angel investor Philip Romano, and also found the key person in Johnson & Johnson that expressed an interest of getting into implantable devices. All of that, is how life would have been without me having the opportunity to meet Richard Schatz, and probably would have been different. Who knows? I may have gotten there some other way, but definitely Richard was essential in getting all this to a happy ending.
So Julio, I admire you for all of your diversity as far as your interests and passions are concerned. And I know you love racing cars and collecting vintage racing cars. How did that passion originate? And tell us a little bit about that particular aspect of your ambitions.
Well, the interesting is that I discovered vintage racing and racing cars and working on them and playing with them. Uh, Not really racing because that is a very, very different order of magnitude, but playing with them and in vintage racing. And then that was that at the time I was really, really burnt out from, working real hard. And I discovered vintage racing in one of the meetings that I came to San Francisco in the Sonoma area. There was this vintage race, and I discovered this. I said this could be a great diversionary uh, activity for me to not to be burned out into this pursuit of medical work. So yeah, no, I had a great time doing that, and a little bit the same thing with the, winemaking and getting into the owning and developing a winery and so forth. So all that it's been. I think everybody needs to have a hobby. Every successful person has a hobby, and because you need to play a little bit.
I was amazed. I was amazed to see all of the vintage cars that you have. You perhaps have a particular passion for vintage Porsche cars, and actually some of your cars won big races like Le Mans, right?
Right. I mean, it's interesting because I recognize in Porsche something that I also recognize in medical careers, like we just talked about. Uh, the Porsche is also likes as a philosophy the slow development, and every step along the development is marked by some stimuli that came from the previous step. In other words, there's a reason for things moving forward, not just fashion or looks or marketing, but rather technological development. And I appreciated that in Porsche. That's why I essentially chose uh, that particular brand to follow along and get to know those race cars a little better.
Yeah, a lot of people might not know that actually you're a superb mechanic as well. You can take a Porsche apart and put it back together, which is absolutely fascinating. I mean,
The
that's
thinker. I'm just a No, I'm not a super mechanic. I know. I mean, that would be, underestimating what the real super mechanics are. No, I just like to play with them. That's all.
so. For the last, I think, at least 25 years, Julio, you embarked another passion of yours and a career in the wine business. Can you tell us a little bit about it? How did it start? I know pretty well because I met you at your winery at the very beginning. That was probably 25 years ago when it just started. And I just recently visited you in the winery about 2 weeks ago, and I was absolutely fascinated by what you have and your family has achieved. So talk a little bit about that particular passion.
Great. Thank you very much for the question. Yeah. I mean, winemaking, it has, um, unlike developments in medicine, which, they go by leaps and bounds and sometimes, have success and then declines. The winemaking development is actually very steady, very predictable, very long term in terms of achieving a goal, and also the important thing that allows you to work with your family. And if you can attract your children to develop an interest like mine did into the winemaking, all of a sudden it becomes a family effort, and that justifies having gotten into it. So as I said, I mean, very slow development, very, very slow. You're talking about decades of, before you see the fruit of your labor, so to speak.
So, as far as your winery is concerned, what's fascinating is one of the first vertical wineries in the region, or is it in the United States? So it's like what, 11 stories high?
yeah, I mean, developing a vertical, gravity winery is actually contrary to the model, the traditional model of developing a winery, which essentially you always have heard that motto: if you want to make a fortune into a little fortune in winemaking, start by putting a large one into it, and it'll shrink. Uh, so what means is that you have to make a big capital investment at the beginning, and then and typically for that reason, people are not very, they don't have a great appetite for risk taking. So they always go the traditional routes. So developing something that is revolutionary or different, I mean, is probably not very common in winemaking. And I had the opportunity to do it, to start it at the time, and then my family essentially extended my initial effort into areas that were perfectly complementary, and essentially in the area of technology. So today, with the advent of AI, we were one of the early, users of that technology in winemaking, and a lot of monitoring and use of electronics in winemaking, sensors and technology, and use computing power to decrease the amount of labor needed in making wine. Um, you know, Essentially it paid off. I mean, we are happy where we are today, and that had set us apart from a lot from the competition in the Napa Valley, which is by itself a very conservative area.
So I recently tasted some of your wines, and I still vividly remember from 2 weeks ago a fabulous wine that you served to us at the dinner, your Cabernet, and it was absolutely amazing. So I think you have achieved a goal that in wine making similar to what you have achieved with the Palmaz and Palmaz-Schatz Stent. So thank you very much for this opportunity. But I would like to ask you one more question, which might be to a certain degree provocative, not for you, but just the idea. I mean, what you have achieved on your own in creating Palmaz Stent, and then with Richard Schatz, Palmaz-Schatz Stent, it's revolutionary, similar what Andreas Grunzig achieved with PTCA and maybe some other ones like Charlie Daughter and so on. And it is truly unfortunate that none of the big ones, like what I mentioned in the field of endovascular medicine, have received Nobel Prize for their achievements, which have saved thousands and thousands of lives. So you can comment on it, or you don't have to comment, but I just wanted to mention that you definitely deserve it.
You're talking specifically about the Nobel Prize.
Yes, yes.
Well, uh, you know, I cannot really comment on that, okay? Because first of all, I'm not going to declare myself deserving of such an honor. I heard other people telling me that I should have been, simply because of the impact factor, having been so large with the coronary stent. And but on the other hand, when you look at the Nobel Prizes in medicine, are highly technological, very much oriented towards biomechanistic, rewards, and I, essentially, I don't think that the Nobel Prize is geared toward recognizing somebody whose effort got initiated 25, 30 years ago, rather something that has been recently developed. That's why, all the biotechnology area is so predominant among the Nobel Prize in medicine these years, which may be perfectly all right too. We have done what we have done, and we're very grateful for the opportunity and seeing this profound medical impact that like keen people like you are good to bring up. And but at any rate, I don't have no regrets. I've been rewarded in many other ways.
Well, Julio, thank you very much for the opportunity to record this podcast. It's been a great pleasure, and it's been a great pleasure to have you as a friend for the last 40 plus decades. Thank you once again, and I hope to see you soon.
All right, I'm really grateful to be your friend too, and thank you a lot for the opportunity as well. Thank you.